Welcome to another episode of Beyond Risk and Back. My guest today is Cody Gardner, and if you work in the industry of recovery, you know this dude's name. I am very happy to call him a friend. We speak often, we text more often, but there's not an aspect of the industry, adolescent treatment, that this guy doesn't know. I'm going to let him tell you his story. Really, the goal of today's show is that we dive in, figure out what's going on with the current trends in the adolescent mental health industry, and figure out what's coming, and figure out whether or not this is really going to be the right next step for our kiddos. Cody, man, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. I'm excited to be here and talk about one of the things I do happen to know a little bit about. Not everything, but I know a few things about treatment. I've been doing it for, close to 20 years now.
Well, and you did it a little longer before that. You mind telling the parents here your personal?
Yeah, of course. In 2003, I went home from college and I told my mother, I said, I've got a real problem. Let's have dinner. She was freaking out. And at the end of dinner, I said, I am addicted to opiates. This is in 2004. And she said, oh, thank God. I thought you got somebody pregnant. And love her to death. The next day, she did the best that she knew at the time. She took me to an AA meeting at 7 a.m. the following morning in Westport, Connecticut, and ended up finding me a doctor who started my journey really in the recovery treatment space. I have the genetics for this. My father has this. My mother has aspects of this in her genetics. And so from that experience for the next 2 years, I went messing around in Connecticut and Boston. I wasn't really sober. I was taking medication to help me, but I wasn't really, quote unquote, getting it. I was definitely not staying sober. I was using cannabis. I was drinking alcohol, but I didn't use opiates for about a year, and my life got a little bit better. And at the end of the year, my life totally cratered. And I stopped using those medicines and I went back to heroin, which is actually what most people do. Come to find out, it's really hard to get off those drugs. Short story is I ended up back in treatment about 6 months later. My mother, in 2006, she called me up one day. She said, you need to come home right now. I drove back to their house and she was sobbing uncontrollably and she was crying, saying, why can't you stop? And I said to her, because this is all I'll ever be. This is what my father is. This is what my genes are. Like, just literally, I said to her, let me go die. And I left the house that day. And a couple days later, I realized I had health insurance and I was getting very sick from the withdrawals from those drugs. And I went to detox. After getting out of detox, I went to treatment. I ended up, through a number of coincidences, in a treatment facility in Northern Connecticut in 2006. And it was a very different time then. There was no real formal therapy back then. It was a lot of 12-step stuff and love you until you can love yourself kind of stuff. My therapist was not a therapist. She was somebody who had been sober for 20 years and knew how to help people get sober. And sometime in the first 10 days or so, I got into we were having fun, actually. This kid, Petey Crack, and I. Petey Crack, we were screwing around in the lobby, and I took a big step back to avoid him, and I hit a door, and on the other side of that door, it opened. In my mind, it is like out of a movie, but the door opened nice and slow, and this big 6'2" guy with big old tattoo on his arm and big old hands looks at me and says, I don't know where you need to go, but you need to get the hell out of my face right now. And I was like, all right. So I slunk off to the back of the treatment center there, and I missed the van to the AA meeting. The druggy buggy was what they called it, the van that takes you to the ANA meeting. And the next day I was talking to my counselor again, and I said, I think I should go make amends. And she said, sweetie, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Why don't you just go say you're sorry? And I was like, I just said that. Amends, right? Sorry, same thing, right? And she said, sweetie, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Just go say and that's what I did. I went over there and I said, Tim, I wanted to say and he looked at me, he said, how about you sit down for a little while and not talk? And he told me his story, much like I'm telling right now, about how he got sober at 22 years old and was living in a crack house called the House of Pain. And his parents had given him one chance to go to treatment, and he took it. And how he had this beautiful life. And he looked right at me at the end. He told me about his life and all the stuff he had done. And then he looks at me and he says, I'll tell you the secret to staying sober and getting everything you ever want for the rest of your life. And I thought, what girl should I date? What college should I go to? I should work for a rehab, right? That's what everybody does. And he looked right at me and he said, do what you're told. So the true story is I said, okay. And I walked away and I went back to my little rehab room that night and I thought about that and I could not think about why I would do what these people were telling me to do. I couldn't figure it out. And to that man's credit, I went back down to his office the next day and I said, hey man, would you explain that to me? Because I don't get it. And he was like, belief plus action equals faith. So if you have a belief in what you want your life to look like, find the people that have what you want and do what they told you to do. Take the action and your life will get better. And I said, okay. I said, I'll do anything you tell me to do so long as I never have to feel like this again. And he did. He told me, he said, finish treatment successfully. He said, go to sober living, stay there for a year, do the aftercare, go to therapy, work on your trauma, get a home group, a sponsor, and a service position in AA, and do the 12 steps like your life depends on it, because it probably does. I did. I stayed in 2006 in rural Connecticut for about a year in a sober house, living with other guys. Many of the guys that I was in treatment with were in sober living with me, and we ended up living in a house for a little while after that. And in 2008, I went back to college in Boston. I finished my degree. I took a focus in behavioral health and behavioral sciences. Ended up at about a year and a half sober, moving to Colorado, where I was born and where I had been trying to move for my whole life, and became a probation officer working in drug courts. And that was my first real job in the industry. I had worked in group homes a little bit before then, but I spent 5 years working in the drug courts here in Colorado. I never told anybody I was sober. I wanted to learn a formal skill set. That was my goal there. I wanted to actually learn how to help people instead of just saying, well, in my experience, you should really fill in the blank, right? And that's what treatment was for so long in America. There was this idea that only I, having gone through it, am uniquely qualified to help somebody else. And that is not true. That is a lie. Technically speaking, I don't care if I had cancer, I could care less if my doctor had ever had cancer. I just want to know that he can help me with my cancer. And I didn't know during those years that addiction was a treatable condition and that what I had actually received was formal treatment. I spent 5 years working in drug courts, and then I got pulled off working for some of my friends, and I have since that day opened over 50 treatment centers around America. I've opened adult women's eating disorder programs. I've done psychiatric inpatient units. I've opened outpatient centers, inpatient centers, substance abuse, mental health, behavioral conditions. I've done a little bit in the adoption autism space. But my skill set seems to be in the world that I know how to open a treatment center.
Does adolescent treatment work?
My hesitation is that I would rather ask, does treatment work? So here's what I know works. I know this for a fact. I know this is an empirical scientific fact. I can back it up with research. I know that addiction and mental health conditions are technically diagnosable, treatable medical conditions. 2 days ago, on May 23rd of 2023, the Surgeon General in America, Vivek Murthy, released another landmark report in which he categorized the largest public health crisis ongoing today in America as the adolescent mental health and substance abuse crisis that's taking place. I will tell you that the answer to that problem is the exact same as the answer to any other medical condition. So, if I have a medical problem, I have to find the right medicine, I have to find the right dose, and I have to take the medicine until the symptoms get better. So, the problem with treatment in America historically has been that it's been this very fixed thing. Well, 12 weeks, 30 days, 90 days, 6 months. But the idea that it should be individualized for every person and that it's going to contain very specific medicine for each person, it's all been made for the group. It's all been made for the large groups of people. And so we don't even really know if anything works. I mean, they say things are evidence-based. And my question for that is, what does the actual evidence say about CBT? What percentage of people see a reduction in symptoms that learn and utilize CBT versus DBT? I would argue that everything is still going to be under 70% success rate, depending on how you define success. But again, here's my question for you. What do you call success? Does it work? What would working look like? Would it be quality of life is improved over the life course? Would it be symptomology goes down? Would it be that the person doesn't use drugs and alcohol for a period of time post-treatment? I'll tell you, the most comprehensive indicator in the treatment space across America is twofold. The first one is completion of treatment is viewed as success. Not what happens after. Black and white, did they complete it successfully or did they get kicked out or leave? The second number one rater that the Joint Commission, who we can talk about a little bit later, they are a nonprofit body that certifies the highest level of treatment in America. Their main statistical analyzation tool that they want to use is the PHQ-9, the Patient Health Questionnaire 9. It is a series of questions about quality of life. And if you see those scores change, we can guess that your quality of life has improved. Does that mean that it worked? I don't know.
Why are we lacking so much in something that not only is it the number one problem for adolescents in America, but it's not like we started dealing with all this yesterday. Parents and children have been putting their families through treatment programs for a long time now. Why don't we know what's going to work and what's not going to work? Why aren't we clear on what's working? Is this because everybody's an individual, or is this because we're really still not doing what actually works because insurance won't pay for it? And those are two extreme responses. But in your mind, Cody, how can we not know this?
I think there's three things at play. I think the first one is the historical relevance of treatment and the stigma that surrounds these conditions, right? The stigma of people that have these is that these are moral failings, and if they just tried harder, they would get better. And so I think that still infiltrates a lot of the American view of things. I would couple that with a prescribing culture that has taken place since the 1970s in America, which believes that pills are the answer to most things that ail Americans. And I would tell you the last one is it's not so much that everybody's an individual. These companies, the social media companies, clothing companies, corporations in America have hired scientists to figure out how to get you as addicted as possible to whatever the thing is, whether it's pornography or video games or clothes or shopping or money or drugs. It doesn't really matter. And I will tell you that the change in society has not kept up. Here's what I want to know, not to ask a question with a question. This is the most socially progressive time in American history. It has never been more socially acceptable to receive therapy, to be in recovery, or to work on yourself as a human being. We just saw Ted Lasso last night, where that whole show is about working on yourself and the benefits of therapeutic growth for human beings. The latent homophobia that was around 20 years ago, the racism in this country, not that it's not there, it's definitely still in this country. Just look at the newspaper. It is roundly less than it was 20 years ago. And yet suicide rates are on the rise. They are on the rise dramatically. The CDC published a report in early May that said that 57% of teenage girls are experiencing recurrent hopelessness and suicidal ideation. We are losing a generation of teens, and the problem is getting dramatically worse. So why don't we know what works? I have another very short way to say that. One of the greatest things I ever heard in adolescent treatment: adolescent mental health and addiction is the only diagnosable, treatable condition in human history that we do not treat it at the time of onset. The first time we see it, we look at it and we say, let's see what happens. Maybe they'll grow out of it. We have this wishful thinking thing that we do. I didn't come up with this idea. A very famous psychologist in Southern or Northern California came up with this idea many years ago, that this is everything else. If you see it, if you go to your doctor's office and he sees acne, they give you cream, they give you a pill, they send you to a therapist, they do something. But in addiction treatment, we say, maybe they'll grow out of it. And so fundamentally, I would tell you that we are asking the wrong questions. If I ask every single person in America what the answer to America's problem with substance abuse and mental health for teenagers is, nobody, not one person that I've ever talked to, and I ask this of little old ladies on airplanes all the time, nobody has ever said more IOP.
You and I have talked about this one a lot. There are two reoccurring themes in our conversations at breakfast. One is IOP and the other is 28, 30-day treatment. So let's talk about the IOP, because I can guarantee you a massive percentage of my audience, their children are either in IOP or have been IOP or are staring down the barrel of IOP. What is it for if it's not for treatment?
Well, here's my question. What is it? right? This is what most people don't understand. So in the 1980s, the insurance companies, as they have been required to do multiple times in American history, starting in 1966, they had to cover mental health and substance use treatment. And they looked around and they said, well, how do we know what to pay for? Because that guy does dog therapy and this guy's doing hiking and that one does, whitewater rafting therapy and this guy takes them to, Nicaragua. What are we going to pay for? And so they said, let's standardize a system of invoicing. And that system came up with what's called a continuum of care. IOP stands for Intensive Outpatient Program. It is one step on the continuum of care. If you want to use your health insurance, the first step is detox, DTX. This is a 3 to 7 day medical procedure which gets you physically off of the drugs that you're on. The next stage is what they call RTC. This stands for Residential Treatment Center, and it means like 28 to 30 days. Now it's more like 14 to 30 days of residential rehab. This is what most people think of when they think of going away to rehab. Then you have something called PHP, which stands for 5 days a week, 5 hours a day of outpatient services. Imagine living at home, but going in 5 days a week, 5 hours a day to receive care at the treatment center. The next level down is IOP, which stands for Intensive Outpatient Program. That is 3 days a week, 3 hours a day. So 9 hours a week, up to 20 of outpatient care. And then you have general outpatient underneath that, which is anything less than 9 hours a week of services. So IOP is part of a standardized system of invoicing. How do I bill an insurance company? Well, the only way to do that as a provider, and not the only way, one of the ways is to put people in group therapy and to bundle the hours into 3-hour segments. And so I ask people all the time, I say, what's the answer to America's problem with addiction, mental health? Everybody says community and vocational support and family support and, all that love and compassion and second chances, all this stuff. We all know what the answer is. Everybody in America has an opinion about what the answer probably is. No one is going to tell you that a standardized system of invoicing an insurance company is the answer to this. So what do you have? You have, and look, it's more complicated than this, but you have broadly two different groups of treatment providers in America. You have a group that wants to take insurance. These people have to meet the criteria of that continuum of care in order to bill the insurance companies to get paid for services.
If the insurance company is going to pay for your teen's care, is my teen going to get good care? If we have to go under an insurance company's standards, and we all share this opinion around insurance and what they do, and more so what they won't pay for, can I expect good care if this facility that I am looking at for my teenager is going to bill my insurance?
Broadly speaking, absolutely. Broadly speaking, something happened in 2010. The Affordable Care Act in America was passed, and it had a series of provisions that requires health insurance companies to pay for mental health and behavioral health services at the same level that they pay for physical health services, which means if you break your leg and your insurance covers surgery for that, they also have to cover an inpatient hospital stay for substance abuse or mental health. What this has done is it has gotten the snake oil salesman out of the treatment industry. There is very little. Back in the 70s, you could go to a basketball gym in some rundown part of town, and you could give the guy your gun and your wallet, and he would give you a cot. And they would bring a nurse around every day at 9 a.m. to check on you to make sure you didn't have a seizure and die. And that was what they called detox. And that was a thing, right? That's a real thing that went on for 50 years in America. Synanon was a treatment center in the 1960s that had an advertising campaign in New York City that said, send us your junkies. And you could send on a one-way ticket from anywhere in America out to California to go through a 2-year treatment program for free. There were no standards. There was no quality control. There was no outcome studies. I was just talking to somebody this morning and explaining how in the 1980s, something big in America happened. We stopped allowing judges to use the eye test, right? So we used to throw people up in front of the judge, and the judge would say, well, you look like you should get some extra chances. And the other guy would be like, well, you look like you ought to go to prison. Well, in the 80s and 90s, we studied this and we found out that the judges were wrong, that there was no evidence to support empirically the decisions that they were making. And so they came up with what's called evidence-based practices. And EBPs are required to be used by treatment centers that take insurance. If you take insurance, you're required to have a license from the state in almost every state in America. And so what this has done is it has created safeguards and protections for the people in treatment. So absolutely, can you expect safe treatment by using your insurance? 100%. Here's the second part. It is a more nuanced discussion than insurance or no insurance. There is a difference between in-network insurance treatment and out-of-network insurance treatment. There are treatment centers that charge a portion of the costs they take insurance for, but a portion will always be an ancillary cash fee, and that is to provide more robust services. The short story here is that most people in America would believe that in-network means that it's a better option. This is not true. In an insurance company's network simply means that they have a contract with said insurance company that guarantees them how much money they're going to get paid. Usually, they get paid less as an in-network provider in exchange for more clients. So you go from a quality to a quantity-based business. 2 treatment centers that I've helped had to fire 70% of their staff and rehire the providers at a lower salary rate when they went in-network. I don't know about you, but I want my doctor to get paid as much as he possibly can. I actually want my psychiatrist to make millions of dollars, because in America, the more you get paid, the better you are supposed to be at your job. And so if you get paid less, if you are a doctor that takes Medicaid, not all the time, but most of the time, he is not or she is not going to be the quality of a cash pay doctor.
What is when a parent is looking at a facility and they okay, this one looks good. Their website's nice. Oh, look, they do the alphabet therapies, right? DBT, CBT, on and on. What's the first question when they get that admissions person on the phone? And people don't know. Like, these admissions people get paid to put butts in beds. I mean, that is their job. And one of the best tactics I have seen is that the person who is there in admissions once had a kid go through the program. I've seen that in a couple places. That is inviting, because suddenly it is a personal shared experience. But what I want to know, Cody, is that if this was your kid with all the knowledge you have, and the admission person starts running script, and parents, these people have scripts. Cody, what would be the first question you would ask that would break them out of their complacency and actually start talking to you as a parent, and as a parent who's terrified?
And I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, the admissions people are scripted. This is a sales position. Now, the good treatment centers in America don't view it as a traditional sales funnel. So there should be more compassion there. The 2 thoughts that jump to my mind are, let's talk about what every parent asks every time that they make one of these phone calls. How long is the program and how much does it cost?
Yeah, sure. And I want to say something for clarity. At Fire Mountain, our admissions people were therapists. I had social workers and I had counselors working those phones, not to sell, but to really determine whether or not this child was going to be good for a program. That was our answer for the quality control of the programming, is a deep understanding of what was coming in. A lot of these people weren't parents.
I would encourage that type of transparency and thoughtfulness. I do think there's some therapists that aren't cut out for some of that work. If anyone ever gives you a finite amount of time on the answer, that's the first red flag.
You mean when you ask how long is the program and they tell you how long it is?
30 days.
Red
Why?
flag.
Why? Why is it 30? Why is it not 29 or 31? And ask them that question, right? And I ask a lot of people this. I know you and I have talked about this many times, but the reason that rehab, quote unquote, is 28 to 30 days is because of the military. They had a policy in 1962 that if you were out of your post for 31 days or more, they had to reclassify you and train a replacement. So they decided to make it 30 days. 4 years later, the American Medical Association came out and said alcoholism is a primary illness. Insurance has to pay for it. And the insurance company said, well, this is really expensive. How long do we have to pay for it? And they said, well, the government does 30 days. But there's no evidence anywhere on the earth that you can take a chronic, that just means it happens a lot, degenerative, which means it gets worse over time, never better, treatable condition of the brain and treat it in 30 days or 90 days or 180 days. In fact, the only answer that I accept when I ask that question is, well, I don't know. Well, how should I know? Tell me more about your loved one and I'll give you an idea of what I've seen in the past. But the idea that I have a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old and you want me to fix everybody in 66 days, I don't see how nobody would believe that.
You and I were talking about timelines this morning at breakfast, and one of the things that came up is I'd mentioned to you about this new trend of 6 to 9 months for adolescent treatment. And I'm working with parents who are struggling finding anything less than 6. There's a splatter of 4-month programs out there. Of course, being someone who was a 4-month minimum program, what parents are hearing now is 6-month minimum, most likely 9. Now, what I tell parents when they say to me, I was told 6 months minimum, most likely 9, my response is that means 9. Because they're trying to no parent wants to be away from their kid for that long. And so they know that if they say 9 months minimum, the parent brain automatically chalks up a year of having an absent child and they will go call another program. So the question for you is, now that we're seeing this 6 to 9 month sweet spot in the industry, to your knowledge, is there any evidence to that? Or is this just when the insurance is going to run out and the parent's going to have to start private pay and the facility's going to get their guaranteed sum? Or is this a real deal? You're going to have a better chance at 6 months than you did at 4, than you did at 30. But is that why they're doing it?
I've got 3 responses. I think this is a great question. I think this is the type of question that parents need to really be thinking about. The first response is, do you know what the most successful treatment in human history for mental health and behavioral health is? It's the pilots unions. It's the FAA. Now, they have some special things going on there, right? When you're a pilot, you're highly trained to do one thing. If you lose your job, you can't do anything else, right? So there's this extra pressure. But pilots, surprisingly, are the number 6 industry in America that has the highest rate of substance use and mental health concerns. And it makes sense. They sleep in different places. They're exposed to high-risk situations all the time. They're chronically undersleeping. They've got, they're using booze to settle themselves down at the hotel in Milwaukee that they're there for 12 hours. And so they end up in treatment at a surprisingly high rate. Here's the thing. When you get caught as a pilot with a problem, they will put you in a continuum of care that will last no less than 5 years. And they have 98% success rates in the program. Now, again, there's some leverage there, okay? The second most successful treatment in human history that I've ever heard of, and maybe I'm biased because of my criminal justice degree, but it's drug court. Drug court, about 60% of people that complete drug court successfully will remain sober and law-abiding for a year after drug court. But see, the thing with drug court is that it's a minimum of 2 years. And if you opt out, you go to prison. And so here's the answer to any medical condition I've ever heard of. You got to find the right medicine, you got to find the right dose, and you got to take that medicine until the symptoms go away. So the FAA uses dosage and frequency. They give you different doses of the medicine over a really long period of time. I have a very good friend who got put in that program, and they were 4.5 years sober. They had been working on themselves. They were married. And they were still doing an hour of group counseling every week at 4.5 years into the program. And so from a broad empirical standpoint, dosage and frequency is the answer to what we're talking about here. The more doses of care you get over longer periods of time, the better your outcomes. The second thing I will say about that is that empirically, every time you try to get more treatment, you have a better chance of getting a better outcome. There are absolutely forms of cancer that are untreatable, and there are absolutely forms of substance use and mental health that are untreatable. And so our job is to keep throwing the medicine at you and to continue to reevaluate, is this the right medicine? I use an example. If you had acne and you put that cream on and you wake up the next day and the acne hasn't gone away, you don't throw out the rest of the bottle. You keep putting that cream on every morning, hoping it'll go away. And if it doesn't work, you go back to the doctor and you say, hey, can I get some stronger cream? And if that doesn't work, he gives you the pills. And if that doesn't work, you have surgery. And eventually, you never get to the point that says, oh, hell, I'll just live with this, right? You keep trying, generally speaking, when it comes to medically treatable conditions. So that's the first answer to your question. The second answer is a much more skeptical question, which would be maybe I can tie two questions here together. What are the things that I am asking on the admissions phones? I'm going to well, here's one red flag that I don't want to forget to say. If a treatment center asks, is he willing? Let me tell you something, pal. If he was willing, I wouldn't be on the phone with you. I would do the treatment myself. That's the whole point. I am a treatment provider calling. If you're a parent and you're calling a treatment center and the treatment center says, oh, he doesn't seem willing, that is literally their job. The point of treatment is to help you plot a course for your own care. The idea that the treatment center should not, the treatment center's job is to help you become willing. The part of addiction and mental health that is a problem is that it tells you don't have a problem. It literally says, I'm fine. I don't look at Kanye West. He stops taking his meds every couple of years. He thinks I'm better when I'm off my meds. And then he's ranting and raving about the Jews, right? The idea here is dosage and frequency. And so anyone that is like, no, he needs to, unless somebody's psychotic, if you have somebody that needs to be stabilized in a facility, in a psychiatric institution first, I'll buy that answer. But broadly speaking, if I have an IOP that's 3 days a week outpatient and I call Fire Mountain up and I say, I have a kid here and and they need to come to residential because it's not working at the outpatient level. And that person says to me, is he willing? I'm hanging up.
No, it's made me laugh because that was never our question.
Yeah.
That was always the parents' question.
Yeah.
What if they're not willing? And I was like, there's no child here who wanted to come here.
That's my
Not
job.
One.
There's been 100 years of research about how to help them become willing. Yeah, it's called behavioral health.
Our response was, you're going to bring them for a tour. It'll be an authentic tour. It's a legitimate tour. Yeah. Don't pack a duffel bag and hide it in the car. Yep. Make sure the kid knows we're just going to, and then I'll sit with the kid and talk to him and say, is it headed here? If it is, call it quit, but that's our job. Willingness is the treatment center's job, not the parent's job, because no adolescent addict.
Every single kid that I treat, I bring them in with their parents for that first meeting and I look at them at about 20 minutes and I say, Mom and Dad, get out of here.
Yeah, that's right.
I talk to the kid and I say, hey kid, if I could get your parents off your back, would you be willing to come in here and do some therapy for a couple months? Because here's the thing, kid, your parents will listen to me, regardless of the fact that I shot heroin when I was younger.
Right.
They think that I am the professional here. And I am. I spent 20 years of my life learning this. I don't know how to change the oil on my car, but I know what to do if you have a heroin problem. And so they will listen to me. Can we make an agreement, right? And what I'm doing there is the same thing that the FAA does. It's the same thing the pilots union and the drug courts do. Is I'm creating leverage. I'm creating my own leverage. And so that's the second one. A lot of parents call and they say, well, what if my kid doesn't want any of this? What if he doesn't have any goals? I never met a kid without goals. I got to be honest. I've been doing this for almost 20 years. I've never met even if the goal is to use drugs again, I could work with that. That's totally okay, man. We would all agree that you should probably take 6 to 12 months off to let your brain heal. But I can't tell you not to use drugs for the rest of your life. Absolutely not. So in tying those ideas together, I would say that the idea of how long is the program? How much does it cost? There's some red flags there. There's some red flags with regards to, is he willing? I think the third part of this that we were sort of getting to earlier becomes, what is the assessments that you are actually using? And so this goes back to this idea of like 6-month treatment. So remember that idea about the judges. What they came up with for the judges was evidence-based assessments. Research institutions have tied research and the assessment to the outcome. And so what we try to do is match somebody's risks and needs to the treatment. A risk is that Johnny's older brother drinks in the house. A need is that Johnny was in a car accident as a kid and has never received any type of trauma therapy for that. We need to be assessing these and assigning services based on the risk. There is this very old idea in America that you go see a psychiatrist for your mental health concern and you go to AA for your alcohol problem. But that's not how that works. These things are melded together. They work together. They are, somebody said to me years ago, they said, he doesn't have bipolar and cannabis use disorder. He has Johnny's condition. And it shows up for Johnny with these very specific symptoms. Are there some similarities to these conditions that are in the DSM? Sure. And every single person, the symptoms show up in a very specific way. And if a treatment center is a cookie cutter place that doesn't care about the history or doesn't understand the previous work that somebody has done or who is not using assessments to drive the treatment process, that's a big red flag to me. I took a kid, I'll say this, and here's my concern with this idea of 6 months treatment to wrap this idea up. In America, we have cast a very large net with regard to mental health and substance abuse. I guarantee you there are people that are getting caught into that net that don't need to be sober the rest of their life. They just needed to take a break. I needed to be sober the rest of my life. If I use drugs or alcohol again, I will burn my life to the ground. I have evidence of that. I tried to be normal. I've got 4 generations of men in my family that will prove to me, if I have any question, that I am not the guy that is going to go back to drinking beer in my 40s. That being said, there are a lot of early 20s people and teenagers that are getting cast in this net, and they're getting some help, but they're being told, you're an addict. You need to be sober for the rest of your life. Go to AA, do treatment for a year, blah, 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 blah. And my thing is that assessment based? Last thing I'll say, I know 2 big words. One of them is iatrogenic. It means the unintended negative consequences of something. If I take a 14-year-old cannabis user and I put him in a room full of 18-year-old heroin users for 30 days, every day, what's going to happen when he gets out of rehab? He's going to try heroin. We know that. This is a therapeutic idea. If the treatment center is not aware of this and not using assessments, they will put that kid in the wrong group. That's what I worry about. There is a group of kids who actually need less. I took a kid to I didn't take him. His father, I tried to get him to let me take him. His father took him to a therapeutic boarding school. He's never had any treatment before. He has never had any therapy before. He was on his way to his first therapy appointment ever, and he got his father to pull over. He got out of the car. He ran around. I'm going to drink bleach, the whole thing that these kids are doing. He ends up in the psych hospital. They pick him up. They fly him to a therapeutic 6-month minimum boarding school, and the kid runs and he freaks out. They find him 6 hours later in the woods. He's fine, but now no one wants to take this kid for treatment because he's a runner and they're afraid that he's going to run again. And so this is a situation where they overshot the mark. They should have started with individual therapy and a little bit of coaching. Start at the low level. It's always easier to go up. It's hard to go down when you start that far in advance. So here's my thing. Is a 6-month treatment center good? I don't know. Tell me about the person, man. Tell me about the kid. How many times have they had treatment before? What was their response to treatment? What's the longest they've stayed sober? What would they tell you was the best treatment they ever received? Here's the last thing. I know I've said that 3 times. The last thing I will say about this. The science is very clear. It takes a minimum of 4.5 months for the brain to build a neural pathway, period. 4.5 to 6 months for the average adult to build a new quote unquote neural pathway. The concept, if you want to look it up, is called homeostasis of the brain. And it will take 4.5 to 6 months for you to hit that one time. So if you have a 30-day rehab, explain to me why it's 30. The science says it should be a minimum of 4.5 months.
Okay, so these bring up a few questions. The first, and I think most important for the listeners to understand, what are you doing differently? You're consulting. You've helped open 50 different kinds of treatment programs. You're working on an adolescent program in Colorado that, I will be honest, I am very excited about. Avanti. And I think the key behind it, the man behind it, is it's dynamic. You work on it a lot. What are you doing differently? Are you just following marching orders, or are you actually making sure these people understand what you understand about the industry, and how will their programs be different?
These are good questions. I mean, these are the right kind of questions. So Avanti Behavioral Health in South Denver, avantibh.com. We just opened in April. We got our state license. We have our first group running. We have we have these component pieces. I mean, here's what I will say. I will say good treatment hasn't actually changed in 50 years. Like, the good treatment is the same as it was in the 70s. It's just that a handful, more than a handful, most people have tried to squeeze that grape over the years, and it is not as good. I'll tell you the second thing that we're doing here is we start, when I build a rehab for somebody, with somebody, we start from the precipice of what's the answer to the problem? What is the answer to the problem with these kids? Stop telling me what the answer to how to bill and invoice an insurance company is. I know how to bill an insurance company. And so we're going to come up with the answer and our pillars to that question. And then we're going to overlay that in a way that allows us to take insurance. But we are going to ask the right question from the start. The next piece that we're going to do that I think ends up being sort of infinitely more important is we want to make ourselves a resource to people. I don't know how to change the oil in my car. I could probably figure it out with YouTube. I have seen over 800 treatment centers personally. The people that run this program with me, they have seen hundreds and hundreds of treatment centers. And our goal is, candidly, we are going to do every single thing we can to try and help somebody. If we believe we can help them, we will do that. If we don't, we will get them to somewhere that can immediately. And that means going above and beyond a little bit, right? That means taking the extra time for the client that has Medicaid, that needs a little bit of help figuring out the system because they don't know. So we're going to spend a little bit more money on the front end to make sure that we have those types of resources, interventions, free to the community classes. We're going to be offering every single week free parenting classes. This is a place for parents to come in and ask questions and hear about from other parents, but also to get some real evidence-based information about what's going on out there. I think the second thing that we are really, really, really passionate about is holistic and not just holistic treatment. That's a term that gets overused these days. We have partnered with a group to provide every single month multiple events a month that are adventure-based therapy services. So they're going to be outdoor services. It's a group called Adventure Recovery. This is what they specialize in. They go. The basic idea is they leave the phone in the car. They go out to the woods and they get a couple miles out. They give the map to the client. They say, "Help us find our way home," and that this becomes a therapeutic activity for the client, learning how to ask for help, navigating difficult situations, interpersonal relationships. But every one of our kids are going to have access to those types of ancillary services every single week. We have three pillars here: family, clinical, and community. The third one, this idea of community for teenagers. I've seen something here in Denver that I have to talk about. I've been talking about it every single day. It is an organization called Full Circle. They are a community center for teens in Denver. It is free to anyone. I was there a couple of weeks ago. I saw over 120 kids who were all in long-term recovery of their own volition, and they all had a massive meeting where there was a DJ and they're going nuts and they're having a good time. And then they broke into their own groups of 20 and they had a 12-step meeting where they connected openly and honestly with each other. After the meeting, one of the kids said, "Hey man, next weekend we're going to Scottsdale with 120 of us and we're going to rage sober for the weekend." And it's all provided by Full Circle. They have their own accountability, their own safety processes. This is how do I say this? I took a kid to that place last week. I then brought him back 2 days later, and from the other side of the parking lot, 5 other kids, and I'm going to make up the name here, started screaming, "Yo, Johnny, dude, get over here. What have you been doing? Where have you been?" And this kid, you should have seen the smile on his face, man. That is all that kid was looking for. He wanted to be seen, heard, had friends. He wanted to know how this goes. And these guys took him in and gave him real meaning. And so
they could have left you standing in the car. I mean, as a coach for a kid who's going through this type of stuff, that's our job, is to be that arm on the side, that hand on the back of the head. It says, ruffling the hair, saying, "I got you." You pull into a parking lot and you reach up to ruffle the kid's hair and other kids go, "Yo, Johnny." you're going to be ruffling air. And that's what it's supposed to be. You're just supposed to get them to the door. They're supposed to knock that door open on their own. I want to ask you, should you take a teenager to AA or NA?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I would tell you that from my perspective, you absolutely should, but I do think that we need to have some context here. There are unsafe people in AA, and there's some of the most magical, amazing people you've ever met. Would I drop a teenager off at an AA meeting that I had never been to? I might second guess that idea. I will tell you that the 12 steps are the most successful thing in human history. Like writ large, the 12 steps have helped more people than any other singular answer throughout the course of a human history. Is it the right thing for everyone? Absolutely not. Do a lot of teenagers have an issue with it? 100%. There's a term in treatment called 12-step immersion, which is us covering the concepts and dispelling some of the myths of what treatment and AA is or isn't. What would I tell the parents? This is about dosage and frequency. Find something. It does not need to be sending your kid away for 5 years. You can do an hour of therapy a week. You can do a little bit of coaching. You can do you know what the most successful intervention for substance abuse is in human history? It's drug testing. Randomized drug testing.
Really random.
Truly knowing that it's going to come, but not knowing which day it's going to come. So what they do is these drug testing places have a color line, they call it, where you call every day and they say, green, blue, and red have to pee today. And if those are your colors, you come in. And so you don't know until that day. The idea that truly randomized drug testing is the number one treatment intervention in human history that we can point to, singular intervention that helps people attain long-term sobriety. And you know why? It's not for the provider. I don't care. I could care less if you drink. I can't control. There's 168 hours in the week. You're in my IOP for 9 of them, right? Maybe 20 tops. The tests are for the person. They're for, it's coming. And so when you're thinking about going out to the barbershop with your friends at the bar, well, I might have to pee tomorrow, so I'm not going to go.
It's just bringing it conscious. It's just creating a conscious choice in a place where it's generally impulsive, compulsive, and unconscious. Habituated, conditioned unconsciousness.
That's $12 a test. So if you're a family that doesn't have the resources, here's what I would say. Start with low dose, right? We got to find the right medicine. We got to find the right dose, and we have to take the medicine until the symptoms get better. This is the problem. People go away for 30 days and they come home and they think they're cured, but the symptoms didn't go away. You were in a mansion in Malibu for a month. This has to be long-term, and it has to be built around the idea of this is treatable. If this was cancer, nobody would tell you were a bad person.
Do you do this consult? I mean, you like myself, we're on this perpetual 12th step, right? We just keep trying to find hope, create its message, give it to people who have none. Do you do this because you love the industry, or do you do this because you hate the industry?
Oh, man. I do this because I believe I owe. I owe more than I'll ever repay. I truly, genuinely believe that that man that was the director of that treatment center, that him and a number of other, mainly men, but a few women, went so far above and beyond what they needed to do for a guy like me. I was a broken, destroyed 23-year-old with nowhere to go and nothing to do. And they went so far above and beyond. And so when that guy said, do what you're told, I said, sure, I'll do anything you tell me to do so long as I don't have to feel like this ever again. And at a year sober, I told my story at that rehab. My mother was there crying. And that man walked up to me afterwards, and as he was hugging me, he whispered in my ear, he said, now the work starts. Now you owe. And God willing, you will never, ever, ever find out that you have repaid that debt. Because if you find out, then you'll stop trying, right? So I don't care if you call me tomorrow, Aaron, and say, that family, you saved them. You were the person that, whatever, man. I got the next one and the next one and the next one. And so my wife and I have an understanding that sometimes, not all the time, sometimes this work will come ahead of my family. This is life and death for people. I will answer my phone. I will help you find a treatment place. I have a website called OrionTreatmentConsulting.com where we do interventions and we do transports and we do treatment consulting. And if you have no money, call me anyway. I will absolutely walk you through getting you a plan. I don't know how to brand the idea. I just want to be the guy that helps people get a plan. Everybody deserves a plan. Whether or not you could do it is out of my control. I don't have a dog in the outcome race. What happens isn't my business necessarily. So yeah, I would, if this was cancer, we would call the doctor when we saw the symptom. That's what we need to be doing as families. We need to be asking for help. We need to be calling, talking to the doctor. We need to be not giving up. And we need to be looking at this objectively like it is a treatable condition, that if you find the right medicine and you find the right dose, the symptoms are going to improve. And that we can't just give up on somebody because they, quote, didn't want it enough. And so, yeah, I will continue to do this. I will continue to help people. We talked this morning about a website that's coming online. Please wait until June 15th, but it's called howrehabworks.com. It will be completely for free, and it is trying to answer the question very simply, how does rehab work? Because nobody has a clue. I've been doing this for 20 years. I still don't have a clue. Yeah, so Avanti Behavioral Health, we are in South Denver. It's www.avantibh.com. And then Orion Treatment Consulting is my personal consulting website. It's www.oriontreatmentconsulting.com. And then howrehabworks.com is coming online next month. Very excited about that.